everyone, Mimir here. This is a continuation of a previous topic. If you haven't watched any parts before this, go check them out. And as always, thanks for listening.
Like I said, it's like intelligence, breaks into it a lot. Where it's like, okay, how smart are our protagonists, our antagonists? Like the story matters a lot. I mean, I hate to say like I'm stating the obvious here, but it's like the story and how you present it matters a lot for like a zombie story. Like we were talking about Chernobyl Diaries, horrible story, horrible story, and so it was a terrible movie. Like even if the effects were good and even if the actors were working their butts off to make it work, still a horrible movie. But if you can get a movie with a really good story, but like it has a couple other failing points, fans are typically willing to forgive it in my experience. Like even if the acting isn't the best, just because it's like, you know what, that was a good story, or it was creative, or it explored something in a way that made me think or made me feel something, and I appreciate that. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. If you can. Especially with zombies, which is a trope that this is not a pun, I swear to God, done to death. But if we have zombies, it's like, well, we've done this enough times, we've recycled the concept enough times, we have to do something new with it. I mean, that's kind of where Resident Evil, I think, is at, where it's like, okay, we've done zombies so much, we've done parasites so much, I guess we're on vampires now? And then
Yeah.
someone in the room was like, yeah, vampires, that's where we're at, good job. And then next thing you know, they did a movie with vampires. But it just, you have to find some way to make it exciting, which it kind of sucks, but I also get it. Where it's like you can't keep recycling the same thing over and over again and expect suddenly it's going to be good again. It's like, no, you've just been doing the same thing for a while, and we've seen all the ones before, so we're not going to bother to see the new one.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you seen the movie Alone?
Which one was that?
Um, Let me see. It looks like it was a 2020 movie. Uh, the guy wakes up in like an apartment and everything. Well, I mean, it's his apartment and everything, but he kind of starts going about his day and he starts seeing some things on the news, of like people kind of like knowing that they're like infected in some way and they're trying to like infect each other and everything, but it's like the people are screaming for help while they're attacking people, like they're calling for themselves to die, like while they're attacking people, because the people are still like in their head, but they're like lashing out and angry and everything. So you have people who are literally just like fucking going nuts, and they're like screaming like stop it at themselves, and the guy's alone in this apartment building, while like all these zombies are running around outside and out in the hallway and everything, and he's got to try and survive out there. Well, he sees this neighbor across the like courtyard in another apartment, and they're like writing signs back and forth to each other until he found some walkie-talkies or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, like that those zombies, they're able to talk and they're still kind of in their head, like they're still somewhat there. They're yelling at themselves to stop hurting other people, and yelling for help and everything while they're like killing. And so it was a pretty cool concept. I thought the movie itself kind of sucked, like, to be honest. I mean, it wasn't like great in the like acting, like the whole acting aspect of it was like it felt very like B movie to me.
Right.
Which I mean it probably is. I didn't look that deep into its making or anything, but
Amateur actors just working on a project, I guess.
yeah, but the story I thought was cool. I just thought that it was completely done wrong. Like they could have tried way harder. And if it was like a big blockbuster movie, like I'm sure it would have been, like really well. More like dynamic feeling between the characters and everything, instead of like the weird like overacting that happens sometimes in those movies.
Yeah, where it's like just before the take happens, like the director, producer comes up to the actor. Did my mic just cut again?
Maybe for just a split second.
God, I apologize for that, but yeah, like I'm talking about like and a scene where they overact, like you can tell it's like, okay, before they filmed this scene, the director or producer probably went up to the actor and was like, hey man, you gotta give it your all, you gotta get really hyped up for just this. And because the way movies are edited together, it's like sometimes it just seems to come out of nowhere, where it's like 1 minute they're super calm and the next minute it's just like fuck this, and then they just, they're going crazy for some reason or
Yeah.
against something is, and it's just like, where did this come from? Like this attitude was out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's not how emotion builds, you know. That's not how normal people react to situations.
Right.
There's another pretty good movie series. I think it's another like that they kind of might still be in there at least a little bit. Quarantine. I remember watching that when I was younger, and holy shit, that movie terrified me. Like, let's see, when did Quarantine come out? 2008. So, I mean, I wasn't young. I was, younger though, and it was around that time when, let's see, how old would I have been? Let's see.
Young, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I would have been, like under 15. We'll just say, because I don't remember the exact timeline. I'm not doing the math all the way, and plus I'm not gonna reveal that. But under like 15, and I was watching it with like some friends and family, and I remember because it's all shot within like first person view, like it's one of those like found footage movies.
Oh, okay.
And it's all in that like night vision mode, like the green mode and everything. So
God,
it's
that would get nauseating after a
oh
while.
yeah, and it was like everything around was dark except for like the main focus of the camera, and that was all kind of like somewhat blurry and like green, and like you just see something kind of like move like out of the corner in the shadow, and the camera shoots over and looks at it and everything, and you don't see the zombie, but you're hearing stuff, and it's one of those like kind of pretty scary movies when you're younger. And I think Quarantine 2 kind of sucked. Like, if I remember that right, I only watched that one like once when that came out, and I was like, okay, this wasn't as bad as the first one.
I was gonna say, is that a COVID joke?
No, no, but
no, I know what you mean. Now that you're mentioning it, I remember too. I think I've seen like clips from the movie and people being like, "Oh, that was actually really scary," and I was like, not at a point in my life where I really cared that much for scary films, so I was just like, okay, whatever.
yeah, I think that one was like in an airport or something, or like in a terminal or whatever. And the first one I think was in like I want to say it was like in an apartment building, or it was in like
Was it like a church or something?
No, it was like a small house or something like that, or like a small apartment complex or whatever. It was because they got quarantined in just this one building,
Right.
and everything was kind of happening to like the residents there. And then the second one was like something was on the airplane or whatever, and when they landed and they were there at the airport or in the terminal, like they got quarantined in the terminal and shit was going on. But that one wasn't like as scary. I think they had more, if I remember right, I think it was like everything was a lot brighter and everything. It was like a lit terminal, or like a hangar or something, But
probably realizing that filming the whole thing in night vision is probably not the best idea.
Oh, I think it worked though. Like filming it in night vision, like definitely added to that movie. And I don't know if you've seen that movie, but I do suggest it. I mean, it's not a great movie, but it's definitely one of those movies that kind of sticks with you. That and what's it called? The Descent. I will not watch The Descent. I won't do it. I've seen it once, and I've seen bits and pieces of the second one. I will never watch that again.
It is quite scary.
I don't like caves. That is my biggest thing. Is I don't like caves, and
Right,
that whole movie is about being trapped in caves with these, and these aren't necessarily zombies either. They're like spelunkers that got trapped down there and everything.
Underground monsters that just live in this cave. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember. A lot
Yeah,
of people
they're
realized they were scared of caves because they watched that movie.
yeah, these creatures were cannibalistic, so it's kind of like zombies, which is why I bring it up. But they also did weird shit, like they climbed on the walls and everything, like all spider like, and like that was fucking terrifying. And that was another one that was like found footage. They a lot of the stuff was, or at least some of the parts and everything was like they were looking through like the camera lens and everything. Um,
Okay.
but yeah,
Yeah,
like
it's been a
anything
minute.
like
I think I'm
that.
forgetting parts. Yeah, it's been a minute, so I think I'm forgetting parts of it. But yeah, that comes to mind too. And yeah, certain movies, I think people they watch them and they only realize that they're freaked out by certain things by watching horror movies. They see them for the first time, and I think my microphone keeps cutting out.
Oh, I can hear you.
They okay, they see like you said, they see The Descent, or they see like something similar, and they're like, oh, I'm afraid of caves. I never realized this about myself before. Like people typically aren't as scared of zombies, but they're like specific kinds of zombies I'm scared of now. Speaking of actually a different kind of zombie that I just remembered. Remember like the magic kind of zombies? Like I know I kind of touched on earlier with like the Warhammer reference. There was another one that came to mind afterwards when you were mentioning it. It was, remember the Mummy?
Yeah.
The first Mummy movie, the really good one with Brendan Fraser, where they had Imhotep. He was in the city while they were trying to translate a tome or whatever, and he like enslaved a whole crowd of people to attack or whatever. Like he enslaved an angry mob with like his magic or whatever, and like they acted like zombies. And sometimes they'd stop and they'd be shambling along, and they would just like chant his name, just go Imhotep. And one of the actors, the brother of Evie, I can't remember, Jonathan. Jonathan at one point got confronted by the mob, and his way of escaping it was to literally just stand there and just go Imhotep, like pretend he was part of the mob, and they all calm down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that movie, but yeah, that's happened in a couple other things too, and that goes back to like, one of the ways that you could survive is to kind of blend in, which is why I understand why The Walking Dead did the whole like cover yourself in guts so you smell like you're dead
Yeah,
and kind of like move through the crowd.
weird tactic, but I guess if it works, it works.
Yeah, I mean, like if that were something that would actually be like realistic, which I mean, there's so many movies, even World War Z, like he injects himself with a virus or a disease or whatever, so he can get past them all, and that's kind of like they started injecting soldiers with that once they figured that out, and but it was something that was supposed to be curable. So they injected themselves with a disease, so they were quote unquote sick and not a good viable host anymore. And then they would go out and kill a bunch of these things because they were basically invisible to the zombies. And like I think that would probably be one of the hardest things, is figuring out like some type of camouflage tactic. Because the first guy who puts guts on themselves and goes and walks into a horde and we find out that doesn't work, like that's gonna really suck,
That, man, that's a double whammy. It's like, man, not only I'm covered after I smeared myself in zombie guts first, like that. Oh God.
Yeah.
Actually, you bring up World War Z though. The movie, the book is infinitely better than the movie.
I'm
That's
sure.
a fact of life. Anybody who's read the book will tell you that there's none of the like disease stuff. Like there's no Brad Pitt like single story going on. The book is like a compilation, like a sort of after action report, being like, "Hey, the zombie apocalypse happened. Here's our memoir called World War Z." And it's much more interesting when it's told from that perspective. One of the things that they did manage to touch on in the movie, though, that I thought was actually kind of funny was, I think it was like towards the end where like they show like the different parts of humanity fighting back, like airdropping in supplies to communities that were still isolated from the virus, and then like triggering attacks of like luring zombies into like a big area and then setting off bombs.
Yeah.
Like that was cool, and I like that. One thing I remember though that made me laugh so hard was you got all these parts of the world that are using guns and like advanced tactics and drone strikes to wipe out hordes of zombies, and tactically thinking and using advanced technology and shit. But then you got like the Battle for Moscow, where you've got all these Russians just charging zombies using like pikes and picks and stuff. It
Yeah.
just got me laughing, being like, "How does the rest of the world have guns and they're back to fighting like it's the medieval ages in just Russia?"
I mean, that's one of the things too where if I had to pick a weapon, I would definitely want something sturdy that I'd be able to like deal a lot of damage with. Um, I don't know if I'd want a sword or if I would want like a blunt object. Like if you use something that can get stuck or wedged, like an axe or whatever, like that's gonna kind of really suck because if you're up close and and your weapon gets stuck, and you're kind of fucked. But then you got the other side where it's like, okay, well if you use guns or anything with ammunition like a bow or a crossbow or whatever, it's like you're gonna run out of ammo. At some point, like
Right.
unless you can get away. But if you have a horde in front of you between you and your next destination, how are you going to be able to get through? Like, let's say camouflage is out. Let's say they're spaced out enough that you could use, melee and still get through. So it's not like you're, going to be like trapped in a horde.
It would
But
have to be small in that circumstance because it's like, one person killing 100 zombies. It's like the believability goes down a little bit, where it's like you need some kind of advantage, like some kind of technological advantage to get through that.
yeah, like if you're running around, you got a sledgehammer, like you're gonna get tired.
Oh
If
yeah.
you're running around, and you got a big old sword, like yeah, it's gonna be a little bit easier to swing. But if it gets stuck or if it breaks or whatever, like that's gonna kind of suck. One of the things I like a lot about the I think it's the second game maybe of the it's like second or third game or something like that of the Telltale series for The Walking Dead.
Oh yeah.
There's a character in there, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but she's kind of like she's parkour, like she runs and jumps off of buildings and everything, and I think
Yep.
at some point she's got like an ice pick or whatever to help her climb, but she tells Clementine about like you want to use something like a screwdriver or an ice pick, or something like that, where it's a small blade that is smooth enough that it's not going to get stuck on anything, and you can like attack the brain, and it slides right back out the same hole.
Right.
You
Like
know,
different weapons for different circumstances, and because in reality, like decapitation is hard. Like if you're going to be swinging, like it takes. Not saying you can't do it, but you need something that first off can do it, and then you need to be able to transmit enough force through that weapon to decapitate someone, and that takes a lot of work.
I mean, it doesn't even
Because
have to be decapitation. It could just be like straight to the head. So
then
I
you
mean,
gotta, yeah,
blunt
you gotta.
force works.
Blunt force does work, but it's like you also gotta worry about piercing bone or like, getting it caught in an eye socket or something. Because like, and that's good too. And I remember what you're talking about because it comes down to, it's like, yeah, you don't want to lose your weapon right after losing it. Like in Last of Us game, for example, you use a shiv, the shiv breaks right after you use it because it gets like breaks off in the person or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like it's a pity you can't use a shiv more than once.
Yeah,
I mean, I get it for gameplay, but it's also like, wow, you got all that trouble to craft a shiv, and it's only a one hit kill weapon.
yeah. I think some of the uh, Resident Evil games too, where you have like you have a knife, but you only have so many uses for it. Like it breaks after like saving yourself from like two or three zombies or whatever.
Yeah,
And it's like one of those things too. If you have a small bladed weapon like a knife or like some type of like spike or whatever, it's gotta be full tang, and it's gotta have something on it. Like I'd rather not have a blade that my hand could slip. Like if I'm stabbing into a skull or something like that, like I'd rather my hand not slip and cut myself on that blade. So I'd rather be a point. So I think like one of my main weapons would probably be something like an ice pick. You know, like I'd
oh yeah.
probably modify some type of stopper on there so I'm like not sliding my hand down if my hand's covered in guts or sweat or blood or whatever. Like something that my hand's gonna be able to force like the point down, and the point's going to be tough enough and sharp enough that it's not going to bend, and it's going to be able to get right through the bone.
Right. That's also like in terms of melee, like people like they're always thinking about like sword or a big axe or something, and it's like, yeah, but the basics also work. Like one of the reasons that apart from the practicality of it was the spear or the pike was so favored was that you don't relatively need as much training with it to put it in the hands of like a simple peasant before they know how to use it.
Yeah,
Like a minimal amount of training and practice, and you can pretty handily be able to use one, especially against an enemy that's not going to get that creative against you. Like I mean, even going back to the my Japan survival one, where it's like the hallways are narrow, and so they can only come at you so many at a time. You put like two people shoulder to shoulder with long poles with smooth spikes, metal spikes at the end of it. They could probably do a hell of a lot of damage to anything coming down that hallway.
yeah,
Like it won't be long before the whole hallway gets choked off and you're basically safe.
I think like obviously the the ice pick is small enough, it's quick enough and everything. But I think like my other option definitely would be something like a boar spear that's like been shortened, like cut in half, because boar spears, I mean, they're typically relatively long, because you want to have that nice like distance between you and the boar. um, but
Right.
it's not as long as a pike, but it's slightly longer than a spear itself. And it's got that stopper on it. So like when the boar, what they would do is the boar would charge um, at people, and they would kind of like circle it with these spears. And as the boar would run down, they would plant the spear into their foot and like lean it up against like their knee and everything, so that way they had like nice stability, so when that boar ran into that spear, it would hit that stopper and couldn't slide down the rest of the spear at the person and continue to try and gouge them. So
I'm looking at it right now on I'm looking at an image just to make sure I know what we were talking about. Yeah, no.
if you're talking, I think you cut out.
Oh, sorry. God, my mic is just losing today. Yeah, no, I said I was looking at the I was looking at it for myself right now. It's pretty good design. I like it. Yeah, that metal cleft sort of halfway down the down like where after the spear bit. It's not halfway down the pole. It's a little
Yeah,
bit further way down. Yeah, to stop it from charging. It's like so you got the piercing power, and then you got to make sure you got enough the little hook or a device right there to make sure that it stops right there. Gives
yeah,
you the ability to stop the charge.
yeah, and I think that'd be great. Like if you have charging zombies, you literally just hold your spear out towards their head, and they run into it, and now you can kind of kick them off or pull it back away or whatever, and they fall and collapse.
Oh yeah,
And that stopper is going to stop them from getting too close, so you can kind of keep them at bay. Plus, I know it's not traditional to like swing a spear, but that's also like a viable option to keep them kind of like backing away from you. You can use that to like knock them out of the way, and less so of using it to cut and more so of using it kind of like a bow staff or like a quarter
right.
staff or whatever. Like you're at that point using it to push them away from you, so you can create an opening in front of you.
Yeah, a number of ancient spear designs, because spears were also meant to be thrown. A lot of those cultures would have so you'd have a spear end at one end, you'd have a metal cap on the other end to sort of counterbalance it for throwing.
Yeah,
But in a lot of scenarios, you wouldn't be throwing that spear; you'd be using that spear, and so you'd use it until the front end breaks. Then you'd flip it around to use the metal bit because that's still like a blunt-ish spear tip at the other end you can use to fight it with. And if that breaks, you either use one of the broken ends that's still sharp, or you switch to a backup weapon like a sword or an axe or something.
yeah. So I don't know, and then trying to pack light, keep light. You don't want to carry anything that's not essential. I mean, obviously, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, well, I might need this, I might need that," and it's like, realistically, you're gonna want a small bag. You're gonna want something small where you can put away a couple like safe meals, so you can get from point A to point B. You're gonna have limited supplies with you. Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to hoard shit like you do in video games and everything, but you got to think the average person, your quote unquote carrying capacity is gonna be a lot lower than you think it is. Like try putting 60 pounds on your back and that's just gonna be, like some of the gear that you think you need. And tell me how far you get running, or even just walking a long distance with just 60 pounds on your back.
Oh yeah, I remember when I was doing when I was younger and we were doing like this sort of survival training thing with this group that I was a part of. I remember the guy who was teaching us all or whatever. He was like, "Yeah, here's your pack, like, or I'm seeing your pack here. Can you carry this?" And then the me or the kid or whatever other kid would be like, "Yeah, I can carry it." And then like they'd lift it up just fine. And then he'd look at them and be like, "No, but can you carry it day after day if you have to?" Like, this is going to be your pack. You're going to be stuck with this. This is your stuff. Like,
Yeah,
you're going to have to not just be able to lift it here in front of me, you're going to have to carry this across terrain and then keep carrying it until you the like we're done, or like, camping trips over or whatever. So it's like, you can't like can you hike to the top of a mountain while carrying this pack is what he's basically asking.
yeah.
I was
And
yeah.
like one of me and my buddies, we had a camping trip. Was it last year? I think it was last year. Where we had a simple, like I think it was like a 6 mile hike or something like that. Um, and it was like through the woods, and it was a little, like the terrain shifted a little bit, not terribly. Um, and I'm not used to doing stuff like that anymore. Like I used to kind of be more active like that, but we had only our two backpacks and whatever else we could carry. And I'm like, okay, no problem. Like we put it on, and I had a decent amount in my bag, and it was pretty heavy, and he had a decent amount in his, and we're carrying shit. Dude, when I tell you I was out of breath so quickly, like that's not even like me trying to dog on myself or anything. That is rough. I started breaking out in like a heat rash and everything. I started getting really dizzy because it's, first of all, it's really humid. It's really hot. Like, we're hiking and I'm sweating my ass off. There's bugs all over. Now you got to think that's going to be your everyday in an apocalyptic event. Like, you're going to be hiking because eventually the fuel's going to run out in vehicles. Whether that's solar like energy that you're trying to store up to charge your electric vehicle, or like gasoline and everything. Obviously, there's other modes of transportation that you could use, especially things like bikes, like bicycles. That would be,
Yep.
oh, that'd be so great. Bikes are easy to fix, and
Oh yeah.
it's so much
I read
nicer
an
having that.
I read an apocalypse survival book that showed like a family that they built like these special bikes that had like a sort of like mechanical assist, like for them pedaling over long distances.
Yeah,
Like it's not a motorbike, and it's basically renewable, and it had me just thinking, being like, bikes are such a good idea. Like for most forms of terrain, and if you have the right tires, you can go pretty much anywhere on those things.
yeah,
You don't have to worry about getting caught. Like, I mean, even most humans, like if you're worried about being caught by humans and like not something slow like zombies, you're pretty well off, because it's like, when's the last time you chased down someone on a bicycle while you're on foot?
yeah. And it's gonna be tiring, but like being on a bicycle, you're gonna be able to cover more distance with less effort. I mean, that's just simple like mechanics. Your body is going to use less effort to put in, or less work to put in more force, or as acting as movement, however the fuck it is. It's been a long day. um, so you're going to be able to cover like these long distances with very minimal effort, and you can stack things on bikes. You can get a bike with like a one of those like back baskets and everything, or like just even the spot that extends off the seat straight backwards or whatever. Like, you can balance things off of that. Like, it's just so much easier to get around with something as simple as a bicycle, and you can carry some of that stuff that you might need, that you think you might need. Um, but learning how to survive out into the wild, like with pretty much nothing, is a super good skill for everybody, just to kind of explore. Like, if you want to watch some videos on it, and maybe every now and then try, like, hey, when I go camping, let me try for 20 minutes, a half hour, to try and start this fire by hand. Like,
Oh yeah.
I
There's been a. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say I've done that before, and It's not
It's not
super
fun.
difficult, but it's not fun, but it's not super difficult. It's definitely something that you're gonna need to practice and everything, which I think everybody should kind of get some type of practice like that, just in case.
What you just said brings to mind though. It's like, yeah, a lot of people think that they're all like really oriented towards like the survival mindset, right up until the moment where they have to actually do something like that, and then they realize, oh, in theory I was good at this, but only in theory.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty funny at that point. The one example that comes to mind is, do you remember the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone thing that happened like 2 years ago? I think 2 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were a bunch of people who were like, "Oh, we can just grow our own food because that's easy." And then they did something that was just insane to look at. Like I'm not an expert, but even I know this was absolute insanity. They put down cardboard in the park, and then they piled on like just like soil and fertilizer on top of it, and then they tried to grow food from that, and the plants were all like wilted and dying, and they didn't have enough nutrition or water. And there's like one image that someone managed to capture of a guy just like next to all the plants that are dying, and he's just got his hands on his head, like he's like, how did this happen? Like, and then I just the juxtaposition of just him next to this field of dead and dying filth that he's got next to him is just hilarious to me, because it's like, you thought growing plants was easy. You thought you had your apocalypse survival scenario all worked out in your head, and you were going to use that knowledge. It turns out farming is hard work.
Yeah. I mean, it's you got to make sure that like ground's got enough nutrients and I think one of the big things too about like the way that we grow food now is kind of really shitty, because we don't let the food die in the field to like reabsorb that nutrients that it just went. We strip all of it and then throw like the rest of it away, so these plants are literally just sucking and sucking like nutrients out of the dirt over and over and over again, and the ground is getting less and less viable for crops. Like, and they also aren't like rotating crops as often, or I mean as well as they should. Like, you have you can't just grow the same thing over and over and over and over again and have it be like still nutritious and sustainable. Like, you have to rotate crops.
Oh
And
yeah, that's a thing I confronted somebody with a while back, where it's like, yeah, crop rotation is a thing, and he had no idea what I was talking about, and I was like, crop rotation is basically the reason that your ancestors managed to build a town eventually, because they realized, oh, we can grow enough food that more people will show up, not just enough food for me and that's it.
yeah.
But yeah, like, turning the topic back a little bit. So I was also thinking about like zombie plans or whatever. It's like that was a joke a number of years back. I remember. I think I was in high school when that joke became popular, at least in my community. It was like, "What's your zombie plan?" Like, like, where would you go and stuff like that. And I always thought that one thing that a lot of people always underestimated was, it's like, look, go far enough north and you're fine. Winter will wipe out a zombie apocalypse. Because, and here's the thing, because it's like, your zombie is basically, it's a dead human walking around. That's meat. That's human meat. Think of you as you are dressed right now, going outside,
Yeah.
and then not going back inside ever. You will just be exposed as you are outside. How long until you get cold enough that stuff's like, the body is going to start falling. It's like, if you ever watched like those decomposition videos or whatever, or like you saw Roadkill or whatever. It's like, that stuff decomposes pretty quick just being left out in the sun.
Yeah,
Um,
the elements takes
it
a toll on life like that.
it really does, and then it's like the same thing should be applying to zombies. Snow will kill stuff quick. Um, there's going to be no way for like a big snowstorm to not wipe out a horde of unprotected human meat walking at some point. Like, maybe it'll freeze and quote reanimate unquote later, but it's like, yeah, but that zombie apocalypse is getting stopped.
Well, I mean, you got to think though too, because if you look at like The Walking Dead, there's times where you know corpses get bloated and they rip in half, or like their meat and flesh like peels from their hand as they're trying to reach through like a broken window or whatever, you know, and they're getting all cut up and peeled away, and they're still kind of reaching out, and because they don't feel pain, they're not going to stop. Or there's times where like the body is literally in half and they're just crawling around, and it's less so of being able to technically survive the cold, um, because obviously, you know, this that went on for years for them in places up in the north, like you think would just be fine, but you know, nobody's coming to save you from the north, you know, coming down to the south trying to like heal the world and help kill all these other zombies, or be like, hey, come north, like it's safe. And there's even a shot where they're, I think they're driving through the snow or whatever, and they're looking at this like zombie that's like slowly walking through the snow, and yeah, in theory, you think it would kind of like freeze up the zombie or break it down faster or whatever, but that doesn't seem to quite stop them.
Yeah, and I know that they probably have to like justify it for like the show or the movies or whatever, but like in my mind, it's all yeah, but that body's not generating any heat, so it's gonna eventually freeze and get stuck where it is and just keep decomposing. And then
Or they
on
could
the
they could
reverse
peel
of it,
away and leave their foot there.
yeah, right, or like just bits and pieces will just start falling off as like the
Yeah.
body can't hold itself together. But the flip side of that, like I've always been fond of like the snow one myself because I grew up in a very cold environment, like you know, like those big northern winters and those big nor'easter storms that would hit the East Coast, and I used to think to myself, being like, yeah, a lot of this weather is pretty safe from zombies. Like no one's trekking miles in this unprotected. Like it's a pretty solid defensive strategy. But then I thought about it as I got older, and I was like, huh, you know what? Going far enough towards the equator is probably also the same thing, just in reverse, because it gets sweltering hot down there during some summer days. Like,
Yeah.
imagine like you know the humidity and the temperature being like 110 degrees. How long is a bunch of just raw meat sitting outside gonna last?
Yeah, slough
Like,
off the bone, you know.
yeah, exactly. It's like how scary is that zombie gonna be when it falls off and sizzles? Like you've seen those videos of people being like, it's literally hot enough that you could cook an egg on the sidewalk. There's been times where people have actually gone outside and demonstrated that on video. It's insane.
Yeah.
Uh,
Put your face
but
on the concrete now.
yeah, and then leave your face there. Like put your bare skin on the concrete and leave it there. Like how much damage are you going to do in the course of just a few hours? And then you do that same damage every day. Like the exactly, it's the same damage just in reverse. Like extreme heat or extreme cold. It's why like zombies are scarier in like smaller like scenario. Like we talked earlier about there having to be like some magic MacGuffin or some magic aspect to the zombies that keeps them being scary or keeps them from being immediately wiped out. Because outside of a small like isolated scenario like a cabin in the woods or something like that, it's hard to justify how a zombie apocalypse could get wildly out of control, because it's like, okay, a couple days into this should be much less scary. Like
Yeah.
there has to be some way for it to propagate before it reaches that point for us to find it believable. Like at least at Last of Us, like the justification is that it's fungal, and fungus is if you dig into the biology of what a fungus like how fungus works, it's basically borderline magic compared to most other animals. And the way that the creatures that are infected by the fungus in that apocalypse act, it makes you think, okay, it's it's not like they all survive, but enough of them manage to survive under certain conditions because fungus is just durable like that. And
Yeah.
so it's more believable that you'll only encounter like fungus, like infected in certain scenarios, and more often than not, you're just dealing with the aftermath, and you're dealing with human scavengers.
Yeah, and that is one of the other things I kind of wanted to bring up is like one of the deadliest things that you're going to encounter during any type of apocalyptic event is other humans.
The
Because
deadliest creature of them all.
yeah, because you are going to encounter people who are selfish, just because like they want the food that you have, or they have their own selfish desires, or they literally do not give a shit. They've been waiting for a day like this, and they're walking around not even waiting for somebody to fuck around and find out. They are going around just to do whatever they want and have fun with it.
Yeah, in a lot of scenarios, it's like it depends on like the raider group or like the guys who take advantage of stuff. And granted, that's a possibility you might have to accept, especially as like society starts to break down. A lot of humans are going to start resorting to their more primal activities and instincts in order to make stuff work. I mean, I'm very pro-human, as some of you may have discerned from especially the Warhammer 40k episode. But at the same time, it's also like, yeah, I can acknowledge that not everybody would be on board with. Come on, everyone, we have to rally together and make this situation better. We have to fight for our future all together. Now you're gonna get lots of like individuals and raider groups who are like, yeah, I'll be fine on my own. I'm just gonna look out for just me, and I'll do whatever I have to do in order to get ahead, even if it means screwing over everybody else.
Yeah,
I mean, shit. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, or they literally just want to keep this going as long as they can because they get to do whatever they want. So they're not like trying to get society back or to start their own new society. They could be going around literally trying to stop people from fixing it because now they get to do what they want.
Exactly. Like some people who like to them like I mean, this probably sounds trite the way I'm about to explain it, but it's like the idea that it's like the apocalypse was the best thing that ever happened to them because like they were like their lives were a mess before, and in the apocalypse they like they got to exhibit cruelty, or they got to do what they wanted basically, and they got to be like this type of person who they had thought they could be like if only society didn't stop them. And when with an absence of society, suddenly it's much easier to do whatever you want and get away with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to think about in those terms. Some people really are like that, where it's just like the apocalypse is the best thing that ever happened to me because my life was a mess and now I get to be a hero. I get to be a total scumbag without consequence. And that also leans into the idea that some people love the idea of a zombie apocalypse mostly just because it's violence without guilt. Like you get how many times have like I mean people are people and they still have like violent impulses from time to time, but the zombie apocalypse is basically an excuse to, oh, I can bury this axe in the face of my neighbor and I don't have to feel bad about it because he was a zombie.
Yeah. And I mean, everybody kind of would act their own way in like an apocalyptic event, especially zombie apocalypse. But the majority of people would definitely want some type of like safety, and that comes from communities or working together. But then we also are very skeptical of each other and ourselves. Like we would want that type of like safety and community, but we also are always going to be thinking that somebody's going to try and ruin it. And usually when that starts happening, people start being paranoid and shit starts breaking down that way as well. Like a new formed community will have one person being like, hey, you're trying to screw us over. And then everyone's like, what? Like, no, they're not. And then now a few others are like, I think you might be right, and they start kind of ganging up on like other people. Mostly, yeah, and I hate to say it this way, but a lot of it is just because they're cowardice. Or they're so protective of what this new form is because maybe, like you said, maybe they are in a higher place. Maybe they are better in this world and they don't want to lose that. They don't want things to get like completely better. They want it to stay just how it is. Not that it's so much better outside of this, but they want it to be this little community just how it is because maybe now they're important.
Yeah, it's it leans into that. Part of what you just said though just reminded me. This is actually freaking wild. Speaking of like, it was about when you were mentioning like people working together as a community and everything. And actually, before I jump into it, I just want to mention something else, and it was the idea that like, because here's the thing: human civilization emerged because eventually like individuals realized, hey, we work better as a group than we do as individuals.
Yeah.
Like I'm making it very short and brief, but our ancestors basically came together and formed big family groups and towns and cities and nations because they realize, you know what, we do work better as a group than we do as individuals. We get a lot more done. We can build bigger and better societies together. Humans work better when we work better together.
Yeah.
It just works. it just works. And the idea of with a lot of these scenarios that it doesn't because humans just suck. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, but we managed to do it before when we weren't nearly as evolved, and we didn't have enough like going on at the time that like back in the old days, like it's like people like embrace their more savage tendencies like thousands of years ago, but they still managed to come together. The idea is that maybe now, as we're evolved and we're much more like individualistic or arrogant or high-minded, we don't have the ability to come together because we're more complex beings, like socially. Which I guess is kind of interesting, but it's like I don't know. That's a whole other like conversation about like man versus nature, I guess. But
Yeah.
one of the things that you did mention that got me interested was that did you know that the U.S. actually does have a zombie plan?
Yeah.
It has several. It has actually that's underestimating it. It has many plans.
Yeah. I mean, because they're like, what if what if this were to happen, and they want to be prepared for like the like just in case society does start to crumble. And I mean, just look at how a lot of people handled some of the shortages with like COVID.
Oh yeah,
Like that tore down like the social aspect pretty quickly. No matter what side you were on, I don't want to say it like that, but that's the only way I can really say it. Like no matter if you were panicking about it or if you were like this is nothing, don't worry about it. Like people were freaking out on both sides of the argument, and it started to show up in like stores and everything, people arguing with each other over something as simple as masks. Now if you have something like a virus going around that is turning people into cannibals, like people
right.
are going to be even more wary about like catching it and trying to like, hey, you're not following the rules that we set forth, so like we should kill you now just in case. Or hey, you guys are taking this way too far and trying to control everybody, like we should kill you now. Like that can easily happen. We just seen it all around the world.
Oh yeah, like you got like a panic buying and like emergency resource acquisition and the distribution of supply network or supply network being disrupted. Like it did these plans did result in like the U.S. government sort of having these like what if contingencies just on the back burner, like well what if our supply lines were being stressed like this before, like or what if what if it was coming from a different end, because a lot of times like governments worry about, oh, what if another nation disrupts our supply lines?
Right.
But instead, it's like, no, what if like society evolves or there's a societal event that means our supply lines are being strained for a totally different reason? How do we deal with it? But the zombie plan thing is actually, it goes even funnier than that, because here's the thing too, it did result in interesting data, and I can only imagine that there were some people sitting in a room being like, this is ridiculous, but it's cool what you pointed out in juncture with it. Like, what at the same time, it's like, what if our supplies were strained like this, or what if there was some sort of like pandemic type situation? Hint, hint. Um, but part of it also is, and I remember reading about this, absolutely freaking wild to me. So the reason that the U.S. was coming up with zombie plans, it was actually meant as a training exercise for guys and like officers in the Pentagon and stuff like that. They would bring in these officers and be like, okay, we're going to conduct an exercise, zombie apocalypse. How do you coordinate, resources and government assets and defenses and stuff like that? And the idea is for them to test the inter branch communication services and like multi-agency like coordination events and like JSOC and stuff like that. And it's actually a really cool idea of an exercise. Basically, it's like, okay, under what circumstance would you possibly have to bring all these different groups in together and then coordinate them? Like, what sort of system would you use? And
Yeah.
it's a really cool idea. It's just it makes me laugh that they chose zombies as a scenario, and then there's like an addendum to to them declassifying that scenario to the public and being like, oh, we chose a scenario that we thought could never possibly be realist and not alarm anyone. And just then people sort of looked at the government being like, really?
Yeah. That's like the whole like aliens thing. Like how would we deal with an alien invasion and everything? And like more sophisticated type of like derailment of society, where it's like, okay, our communications have been knocked out because extraterrestrial came in and like wiped out our communications, and it's like we're not going to get them back as easy as if like a zombie apocalypse broke out and all of a sudden like Steve from the plant is been eaten. Like, how do we now continue getting electricity or our communications across if like you know at that point it's more of like we just need manpower. And if it were like aliens or extraterrestrials or whatever, like that might be a little bit more complicated because they knock us out with superior technology, or just an EMP like to the planet, like
Right. Like these scenarios, like it's cool to think about like, as like what it, it's sort of like a what if kind of deal, but it also is like cool that you can sort of get like these little ideas where it's like, how would we deal with a crisis that's similar to this that we just haven't thought of yet? Where it goes into that whole like prepare for everything just in case, and
yeah,
it amuses me that somewhere in a boardroom, because they have to keep some kind of record of these training scenarios. So it amuses me that somewhere in a room there's just like 100 different copies of a zombie apocalypse scenario for the U.S. government, like coordinating military and emergency services nationwide, and maybe bring in our allies, or how to coordinate defenses for our allies and stuff like that. And it makes me laugh to think that we just have a storehouse of these plans sitting around somewhere, because it's like they would have had to have exposed hundreds of people to this training scenario in groups, and they all would have come up with their own ideas. So it's just amusing to me to think that eventually it's like, oh, don't worry, we don't have just one zombie plan, we have hundreds.
yeah. And I mean that's kind of the thing with like smaller communities as well, is not just thinking about it on like large scale, but like let's say everything has already collapsed. Now you and a group of your best friends and some strangers you met along the way, like now you're creating a society or a safe place or whatever. Like, how are you going to run that? Like, who's going to be in charge of farming? Who's going to be in charge of defense? Who's going to be in charge of communications with outside groups? Who's going to be in charge of more like the I don't want to say like political side, but like the like
community management.
Yeah, or like who's going to be in charge of reaching out to these other like communities and everything and forming some type of like peace deal or whatever, like because obviously you're going to run into all sorts of different types of communities. Are you going to like merge communities? Are you going to have trade? What can you offer? Like are you going to just provide what you need for your people, or are you going to have some type of deal because like maybe you're lacking in one area and now you have to come up with some trade deal? Like you literally are restarting society, and even if it's small scale like that, like it's going to be difficult. You're going to have like qualms within the small groups.
We don't often think about it because these systems have been in place as long as we've been alive, but it's like these complex systems have sort of been more or less figured out for a long time. And so like I mean, a lot of times they emerge naturally. It's just a question where it's like you fix one problem, you put a system in place, and then you move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And this over time, it became such a part of the background noise of civilization that you don't even notice it anymore. Like, I mean, just the plumbing in your home is complex enough that it takes a whole system, like a whole management department, in order to make sure it all goes well for just your community alone.
Yeah.
And it comes down to, it's like, well, you never had to think about it before because the system was built up. It's just people are daunted by the idea of rebuilding the system. It's actually one of the reasons that I'm very fond of the idea of. I think my microphone might have done that again. It's one of the reasons that in an apocalypse scenario, I'm very fond of the idea of someone like going into a library and like fortifying the library, because I hate to sound like a public service announcement when I say this, but your local library is a wonderful resource for everything which you may know.
Oh no, yeah. When we talked about like place we could fortify, library was definitely one of my top ones. That's like some type of like old government building But again,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably going to be like a hot spot. Like a school or a hospital. Like those are also other hot spots. People are going to look to that and see, hey, big defense. One of the things that I absolutely love is a local library, because you're going to have so much information inside there, and it's probably going to be like a decently sized building or a small enough building that you could house like a small group of people in there pretty comfortably. And they have facilities and things like that, so I mean you're going to have bathrooms. Obviously, like you might not have the running water and everything, but at least you have somewhere private like that you could, maybe set up a bucket or two. um
Right,
you know
and depending on your circumstances, also, it's like at least you have those facilities to rely on, even if like the water isn't running. And depending on what your water scenario is, like I've lived in a home before where it's like, all right, the power's out, so like we're not able to like or like the toilets are or the yeah sorry it was the toilet was busted, so it doesn't flush. So here's a bucket of water that we got from outside. Pour the bucket into the tank, and then the rest of it will drain naturally if you
yeah,
do that.
it's like a camper toilet. It's the
Exactly.
same thing. You dump the water in, and yeah. But I mean
That was what I was
that's
thinking. Thank you.
yeah, but that's like literally one of the like best places you can go, because and again, don't want to sound too corny about it or whatever, but like it is filled with knowledge. You're going to find pretty much everything you need to know in a library or a
Yeah,
bookstore, like
it makes me chuckle in like some apocalypse scenarios that I've seen some people write, where it's like they're like, "Oh, I don't know how to do this," and then in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, "Oh, maybe if you've gone to the local library, it's like people don't have the internet, so they don't know how to do anything." And I'm just like, "Wasn't any of this written? All of this was written down. Like
yeah.
all this knowledge is still written down somewhere. You just don't know how to find it."
Yeah, and I know for a fact there's going to be people out there that like if this were to happen, like they might go in and hoard that knowledge, or like take it and try and like redistribute it. And that's another thing with like The Walking Dead. There's this lady that travels around and she is trying to help rebuild the world, and she's giving away like this knowledge. I think she does some trading or something for it too. But yeah, she wants to give this knowledge back to the people, so they can form their communities or better their communities. And she travels around like trading this knowledge, and it's
Oh, that's
basic.
cool.
It's basic stuff like how to build a windmill. So you can have power. You can have like making grain and everything easier. But
Yeah, how does a dam work? There's a like if you say your community built next to a hydroelectric dam of some kind and it's broken, nobody left knows how to fix it. What if she were to be like, "Hey, would you like an explanation for how that dam works?
yeah, so
Maybe some knowledge of general engineering so you can connect the power."
yeah, I think we're just about at time here. So I think a good place to wrap that up is visit your local library.
Yeah, visit your local library, folks.
uh,
They've got Wi-Fi if nothing else.
yeah, keep things on hand if you ever think that's going to be a possibility. And no, I'm not trying to be like one of those preppers that are saying like hoard your shit, but hey, like having supplies ready on hand, even if it's something as simple as like you're getting snowed in, like it's good to have basic necessities ready in case something happens. um,
Yeah.
just be safe, be kind. um, and I think that wraps up our talk, at least for this session, for zombies and the undead.
All
um,
right.
just a quick few other things. Um, like I said, we're probably gonna have this episode split up into like an hour each. Um, I'm gonna do my best to kind of do that. I'm gonna find like a nice natural break in it and everything. We had some technical difficulties, so it wasn't as easy to just kind of like switch between screens and everything. Hopefully, the next time we'll get that all sorted out. Um, but anything that you would like to say?
Well, just throwing it out there that well, I'm about to be that guy. But folks, if you like what we were talking, go ahead and throw us a like and maybe hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and maybe visit our store to support our merch. You'll be paying us, and you'll also be buying yourself some cool stuff at the same time, or maybe just some basic stuff that you just like some more of. Really, can you ever have enough T-shirts in this life? That's my question to you. But yeah, no, I hope you guys enjoy the topic. And if you did, and even if you don't have the money to support us, we appreciate you guys engaging with us. Go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what you thought. Point out a part where you thought either I or Mimir were being idiots, and maybe your zombie plan is much better than ours, or maybe we didn't talk about a movie you want to talk about. Tell you what, if you comment about it, we can then talk about it. If we're missing something big that you guys really want to hear about, let us know. We're really eager to engage with the community and hear what you guys think. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Just interact with us. We're out here.
Yeah, come watch it live on Twitch when we get that working again. There's gonna be like the live chat and everything. We'll be able to read you guys' comments and kind of go through all of it as it's happening. The YouTube channel, share it with your friends. Like that interaction really helps us a lot. Other than that, I think we'll be all set for our next session. I know you're seeing this as the second part of the video, so it's not going to make too much sense. But going forward,
Right.
our other videos, the second half of a video or the third half or however long we do these, it's not going to be one right after the other. Like this zombie one's probably going to be split up like within a couple weeks of each other or so, so it's not going to be like part 1, part 2 within like 2 weeks. But yeah, just like Lennex said, let us know if there's any other topics you want us to cover. Let us know if you want us to revisit any topic.
Yeah, we got to hurry up and get out of here before I give in my urge to make fun of Mimir for saying 3 halves.
Well, okay, fuck off. You know what I meant.
Did we though? Did we though?
All right, guys, you take care.
Later, guys.